Chapter 1. Dirty Shirt. Jones and Scenery. Sims claimed they got religion, but it wasn't real religion. It was just regret from drinking too much on empty stomachs. I've seen that happen before and even felt it myself. Dirty Shirt wasn't a big man, and his face was unusual, with one wandering eye that often ended up staring at his crooked nose, as if it couldn't believe how bent it was. He had a strange sense of humor and hated two nearby towns, Yaller Horse and Paradise, because he was so loyal to his own town, Piper Rock. Scenery Sims was smaller than Dirty Shirt, tough, nearly bald, and had one ear that stuck out. Like Dirty, he was deeply loyal to Piper Rock. It was December in Piper Rock, freezing cold, with barely any trees around to block the wind. The town was small but proud, and people stuck together. Dirty Shirt and I had been working near Plenty Stone Creek, but the cold forced us back to town. I spent 2 days trying to thaw out by a stove. When I finally went outside, I saw Dirty Shirt sitting in the snow in front of a saloon, bundled up but freezing, even though it was warm inside. Magpie Simpkins had told me earlier that Dirty and Scenery were completely drunk the day before, so I thought Dirty might have frozen to death. But he wasn't dead. He looked at me and said, "Being a sinner is hard, Ike." I joked back, "Depends on how warm your clothes are. Want a drink?" Dirty refused, saying he was repenting for his sins. He listed all the bad things he'd done, fighting, stealing, and cheating, but I told him freezing wouldn't make up for it. Dirty then told me he and Scenery had gone to church, and I was surprised. He complained that the church didn't even have a bell and didn't look like a proper church. He decided to sell his old car to buy a bell and make the church look better. I laughed and jokingly suggested Scenery sell his camel instead. Here's the story about the camel. Dirty and Scenery had owned a gold mine together and made some money. Scenery went to Butte to buy machinery for their work, but got drunk, argued with someone about how long camels can go without water, and ended up buying a shabby camel from a carnival. When he came back with the camel, Dirty was furious. He ended their partnership, bought out Scenery's share for $50, and went to Butte himself. But Dirty also got drunk and spent $600 on raffle tickets, eventually winning an old car. The car was only the second one in Piper Rock, but it scared the locals so much that Dirty had to store it in a stable. Meanwhile, Scenery kept his camel at his shack with a warning sign to keep people away. This was just another strange chapter in the lives of Dirty Shirt and Scenery, two odd but loyal men living in the harsh, quirky little town of Piper Rock. Chapter 2. Beware of the camel. That thing bites. Scenery. Sims named his camel Araby, and it smelled awful, like a bad alley. Worse, it would bite and act like it was always upset. The town's vigilance committee even warned Scenery to keep his camel off the main roads because it scared every horse it encountered, often throwing the riders too. One cold day, Dirty Shirt refused to come inside, so I left him freezing on the sidewalk and went into Buck's saloon. Inside, I found Magpie Simpkins, Buck Masterson, Wick Smith, and Old Testament Tilton gathered around the stove. Old Testament was the town preacher, a towering man over 6 feet tall with a stern look that said he wasn't afraid of anything. According to Magpie, Old Testament knew more about hell than anyone and might work there as a guide someday. Magpie, my longtime partner, had wild ideas about improving humanity, but lacked the know-how to make them work. Wick Smith, a retired killer, now ran a store and lived with his very large wife. Buck, the saloon owner, was known for his shady past, but had settled down somewhat. These four were up to something, so I left before I got dragged into their plans. Later, I noticed Magpie acting suspicious and sneaking looks at a small black book. When I checked it out, I found it was a Bible, his first one. The next morning, I went back to Buck's and bought drinks for everyone. But when I reached for my $20, all I found were raffle tickets in my pocket. Magpie had swapped my money for tickets to win Scenery's old car, which was being raffled to raise money for a new church. I was furious, but Magpie insisted it was for a good cause. The current church didn't look like a proper church, and they needed funds to build a new one with a bell. Dirty Shirt had even donated his car for the raffle. Buck added that the drawing would be held on Christmas Eve, along with a big community event. Later, I went to Dirty Shirt's shack, where I found him and Scenery by a warm fire with a bottle. When I asked how their newfound religion was going, Scenery shrugged and said, "We're getting organized." They admitted the current church looked more like a saloon and agreed a proper church with a belfry was needed. Dirty was proud of donating his car, insisting it still ran perfectly. Scenery mentioned he had also lent Araby the camel for the event, though not for the raffle. He hoped the camel wouldn't bite anyone, unless they were from the rival towns of Yaller Horse or Paradise. Chapter 3. I spent the night with Dirty Shirt and Scenery, two men full of enthusiasm for their cause, and the next day I felt so guilty that I almost found religion myself. Around midnight, Dirty Shirt went out to fetch some wood, but left the door open when he came back. By morning, I had a frozen ear. Later, I asked Magpie Simpkins about the Christmas event they were planning. He asked if I even knew what Christmas was about. I said it seemed to be a time when people exchanged shirts, based on what I'd seen. He told me to come to the event and find out. Since I'd already spent $20 on tickets, I agreed. That afternoon, I went down to Paradise, a town much like Piper Rock, but with questionable morals. There, I ran into Tombstone Todd, Hair Oil Hepner, and Hipshot Harris from Yaller Horse, an unruly trio if there ever was one. They were suspicious of the raffle in Piper Rock, suspecting some sort of scam. Hair Oil and Hipshot initially refused to attend, but quickly changed their minds when they learned their tickets might be voided if they didn't show up. In Paradise, I discovered people were playing poker, using raffle tickets as currency, with a 50% discount. I joined the game and lost 19 tickets right away, holding on to one only because I misplaced it. Tombstone Todd won most of the tickets, as Paradise residents were eager to win the automobile. Back in Piper Rock, I stayed at my shack. Magpie was busy organizing the event, and I decided to avoid getting involved. Around 9 p.m., Dirty Shirt came by, offering to buy my tickets back since there was demand for them in Paradise. I refused, thinking I might win the car myself, though Dirty warned me it wasn't worth the trouble. It had no brakes and was falling apart. Dirty Shirt explained that they had raised enough money to build a new church and buy a bell. He and Scenery wanted the new church because the current one looked like a saloon. Dirty also revealed he was part of the Three Wise Men in the Christmas performance, alongside Magpie and Tellurium Woods. On Christmas Eve, Dirty and Scenery were busy setting up the automobile in Mint Hall, cutting a hole in the wall to bring it inside. The hall was decorated, and the orchestra played terribly as usual. The raffle was drawing people from Paradise and Yaller Horse, eager to win the car. Dirty mentioned that no Piper Rock resident owned a ticket, which wasn't entirely true. I still had one, though I wasn't keen on winning the car. Later that evening, Magpie and Tellurium barged into my shack and dragged me to the event. Wick Smith, who was supposed to participate in the performance, had injured himself, and they needed me to take his place. Despite my protests, I ended up at Mint Hall facing a large crowd. The hall was packed, and the automobile sat proudly on display. Magpie assured me that if Paradise or Yaller Horse didn't win the car, it would only be because they lost their tickets. I realized the raffle had brought in enough money to build the new church and bell, but I doubted the folks from Paradise and Yaller Horse knew they were funding Piper Rock's improvement. If they had, they likely wouldn't have bought tickets at all.